Welcome to the beginning of section 2 of this class. This is the study of plant physiology, which focuses on plant growth and development in response to the environment. The first lesson covers growth, development, and the role of hormones. So growth is a non-reversible increase in plant size, right? It's kind of obvious, isn't it? But that bit about non-reversible is kind of important. Imagine a sponge, which can pick up water, soak up, and get bigger. But that's reversible. It can dry out and get smaller again. Growth is influenced by heredity and the environment. The environment influences the kind of growth, whether it's vegetative or reproductive, the rate of growth, and the total size of the plant, within the limits of its genetic potential, of course. And development, well, that's a change in plant form. Look at the picture. It shows the lettuce plant in the head form on the left, and the lettuce plant that has bolted or gone to seed on the right. Energy from the leaves was used to elongate the stem and put up a seed head. Some kind of environmental trigger is necessary to tell the plant to change form. And the germination and emergence of a bean seedling from the soil, well, that's both growth and development, increase in size and change in form. So growth and development are both influenced by genetics and the environment. By genetics, because the maximum size of a pumpkin, for example, is determined by its genetic background. Seed of giant pumpkins are sold for hundreds of dollars. Can you believe that? Giant pumpkins are a bit of a mania for some people. Anyway, a baby pumpkin won't develop and become a giant pumpkin just by giving it more fertilizer and water. At the same time, a giant pumpkin that grows in an environment that's inhospitable, it's deficient in nutrients or not enough water, won't grow as big as its potential. The environment counts too, you know. The environmental conditions we're going to look at in this class are light, temperature, water, and nutrients. Before we look at these environmental conditions, let's follow plant development. Dry seeds may last for many years. Once they receive some moisture, however, germination can begin. The seedling is a young, tender plant that begins to grow, and a juvenile plant is a plant that has not yet flowered. A mature plant is a flowering plant, and a senescing plant has finished flowering, begun fruiting, and started to die. Death and decay are a natural part of life. And then, of course, it all starts over again. Mature plants will produce flowers, seeds, and fruit. Here we see a young green bean plant. The white part here are the flowers, and you can see the young green pods here, which are fruit. They're going to contain seeds. As these fruit grow, the seeds develop within. Once they're mature, the seeds will start to dry, and they can be planted again. The process of flowering and fruiting actually triggers the senescence or the aging process in annual plants. Of course, this is the plant development process for annual plants, so-called annuals. They'll go from seed to seed in 1 year. In addition to annuals, which complete their life cycle in 1 year, there are perennials, which live and bloom year after year like trees. Flowering does not lead to senescence and death in perennials. And biennials, who live for most or all of 2 years. They remain juvenile or vegetative during the first year, and then become reproductive and will eventually die in the second year, things like cabbage, beets, and most onions. There are lots of flowering annual plants, petunias and marigolds among them. Geraniums are also often grown as annuals, but if the flowers are picked off and the plants are not allowed to freeze, geraniums can actually be grown as perennials. Most vegetables are annuals in the northern and the southern hemispheres, getting away from the equator. However, in tropical climates, they may become perennial. Peppers and tomatoes may live for years and produce several years of fruit near the equator if they're given enough water. They often die eventually to the diseases, however. There are lots of perennial bulbs that are grown from year to year, daffodils and tulips being among our favorites. Of course, trees, shrubs, grasses, and asparagus, as in the picture here, are perennial too. The sugars and starches that are produced by the leaves each year are stored in the roots and or the stem to allow regrowth in the spring. Carrots and onions are examples of biennials which grow vegetatively the first year. After the winter, they'll often put up a seed head the second year. Of course, this makes them useless for consumption. We really don't want the seed head. We say the plant has bolted when it's gone to seed. You probably ought to know these three definitions for the exam. And remember, these are temperate region definitions. In tropical environments, that may not be true. A tomato plant, for example, can live for many years until it gets diseases to die. If we're going to understand exactly how plants are affected by the environment and cause developmental and growth changes, we need to understand hormones. Hormones generally control plant growth and development by affecting the division, the elongation, and differentiation of particular cells. Plant hormones are produced in very low concentrations, but a small amount can have a profound effect on the growth and development of a plant. And here's how it works. An environmental signal, like shorter days or cooler temperatures in the fall, are perceived by an internal receptor in the plant. The receptor is usually a plant pigment, a biochemical that has color. It's usually in the leaves. This receptor either triggers or produces itself a plant hormone that causes the plant to respond in some way. We're going to take a look at some examples now. Hormones are produced naturally by plants. There are five major groups of plant growth regulating compounds. We're going to look at three, the three main ones, auxins, gibberellins, and ethylene. The first one's called auxins. These are really interesting. Auxins can cause several responses to plants. It can cause a bending towards the light, like a phototropism, a downward growth in response to gravity, which is called a geotropism. It also promotes apical dominance, that means the top of the plant continues to grow and prevents side shoots from growing. It also encourages the formation of new roots. Let's take a look at this. The tropism most easy to recognize is phototropism. That's where plants turn towards the light. If you've ever had a plant growing on a windowsill, you'll notice it leans towards the light. This was an early experiment. It was actually done by Charles Darwin. In graphic number 1, you can see a seedling is turning towards the light. In graphic number 2, when the seedling was cut off, the plant didn't turn towards the light. In graphic number 3, when an opaque cap was put on the top of the seedling here, it again didn't turn towards the light. But when a transparent cap was put on top of the seedling, it did turn towards the light, indicating that something was happening here in the top of the seedling. And to complete the experiment, when Charles put a opaque cylinder around the base of the seedling here, it still turned towards the light. His conclusion was something was going on in the top, very tip of the seedling. There was something in that apical meristem that sensed the light, and he was right. Today we know that auxins are produced in the very, very tip of the plant in the apical meristem, as well as some of the really young leaves. This compound called auxin has several effects on the plants we're going to learn about. This is probably a test question. If you were to measure the auxin level at different places in the plant, from the very top to farther down to farther down to farther down again, you'll find less and less auxin as you go down towards the base of the plant. Auxins produced in the tip and concentrations decline as you get farther and farther away from the plant tip. In the top of the plant, auxins do two things. One is it causes cell elongation. So all that auxin in the tip of the plant causes the cells to elongate and grow upward. The other things auxins do is it prevents side shoots from from growing. Um, so you get more side shoots towards the bottom of the plant than up the top of the plant because there's less auxin concentration towards the bottom. The higher auxin concentration towards the top prevents side shoots from growing. Okay, so light triggers auxin and auxins help cells to elongate. This helps us understand how the plant turns toward the light. In this picture, the light is coming down strictly from the top. It's even on both sides, and both sides of this emerging seedling are growing equally, going upright. But what happens if the light comes in from the side? Well, the internal receptor, somewhere in the tip here, is producing auxin. It sends more auxin down the darker side of the stem than the lighter side of the stem. If the darker side of the stem gets more auxin, more cells elongate, this side grows faster, and the plant turns towards the light. Pretty cool, huh? There's a similar response to gravity. If a plant falls over, more auxin is actually produced on the bottom of the stem than on the top of the stem, turning the plant to grow upwards. This causes the plant to turn. A young seedling knows to send its shoot upwards and its roots downwards. If you lay a seedling on its side, what you see is a greater accumulation of auxin on the bottom half of the seedling, thus elongating the cells in the bottom half and turning the seedling upward. The exact opposite happens in the root system. On the roots, there's more auxin concentrated on the top of the seedling, thus turning the plant downward, turning the root system downward. Here's another effect of auxin. Auxins prevent side bud growth. A higher concentration of auxin near the top of the plant means there's less side shoots near the top. As the auxin level naturally declines as you move down the plant, the side buds are allowed to grow. This is called apical dominance, the dominance of the apical meristem preventing side shoots from growing. As long as the apical meristem is intact, side shoots will not develop near the top of the plant. But if you cut the apical meristem off, like right here in this bean plant, you get side shoots developing right below them at the next leaf node. We do this on purpose to create bushier plants sometimes. And another effect of this magical plant hormone is it seems to create root growth. In this picture here, you can see there's a leaf of an African violet plant with its petiole cut off. The petiole was dipped in water and then dipped into this powdery substance called rutone. Rutone is an auxin-like hormone. And when it does that, it'll stimulate root growth. You can see the young roots growing on the edge of this, on the petiole of this African violet. Let's move on to gibberellins. Gibberellins stimulate both cell division and cell elongation, and therefore they can make plants grow really tall and spindly, sometimes too fast. We're going to talk here a little bit about the foolish seedling disease, which is how gibberellins were discovered. This is a picture of some young seedlings in a rice paddy. Scientists in Japan discovered the effect of gibberellic acid by studying so-called foolish seedlings that grew too tall and spindly and fell over in the rice paddy. They found these seedlings to be infected with a fungus called gibberella. The fungus concentrated a chemical that all plants make naturally, gibberellin, and they extracted this chemical and found the hormone gibberellin. There are lots of different types of gibberellins, but they all make plants elongate and grow tall. In this case, the foolish seedlings grew too tall to be useful as they fell over and were not useful for harvest. Unlike auxin, gibberellins are produced throughout the plant. Gibberellins cause the plant stems to elongate dramatically all throughout the plant. Plants grown in the dark will develop a lot of auxins in an attempt to grow taller and reach the sun. They'll often get tall and spindly and fall over. Here's some peace seedlings that are grown in good light, and here's some peace seedlings that are beginning to be grown in the dark. You can see they're getting very, very tall before their leaves come out. I remember there was a golf tournament in the 70s, which they used gibberellin to try to make the tournament more difficult. I happened to be in graduate school at the time and studying hormones, and so I was paying attention to this. On a golf course, you want to hit the ball in the fairway where it's nice and flat. The rough gets a little bit taller here, and taller as you get farther and farther away from the fairway, and can be, quite a hazard. So in the golf tournament, gibberellins are sprayed on the rough on Thursday. Most golf tournaments will run Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And they made a big deal about how the tournament was going to get much more difficult on Saturday and Sunday as these magical gibberellins made the rough grow faster. And it was kind of funny because nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. Plants that are things that can happen in a laboratory don't always happen. Don't always cooperate in the field. And this tournament stopped talking about it. This so-called effect of these gibberellins by the Sunday afternoon. Let's move on to ethylene now. Ethylene is kind of unique in that it's found only in a gaseous form. It induces ripening of fruit, causes leaves to fall off in some plants, and promotes early death in some other plants. Increased ethylene in maple and oak leaves in the fall is part of the reasons they fall off the trees. Ethylene is also used to ripen fruit like green tomatoes and bananas. Ethylene's a gas that stimulates ripening. For those of you who have heard about the trick of putting cut apples or apple peels in a brown bag with bananas to encourage the bananas to ripen faster, well, the reason they do this is because the apples are producing ethylene. When ethylene is given to mature green tomatoes, they'll ripen faster. They won't taste as good, but they will turn red. Here, the fruit in the middle are mature green tomatoes, and these fruit on the right are tomatoes of the same age who were treated with ethylene to encourage them to ripen faster. Did you know that some tomatoes are picked green? This way they can be bounced around during the harvest. They're up here, they're put on a mechanical conveyor belt, run through some water bath to wash and sort. Since they're still hard, they can take quite a beating. Here, workers are sorting through the tomatoes and taking out any that may have been bruised or deformed. They get packed into a box while they're still green, shipped to your local neighborhood warehouse, where they're treated with ethylene to ripen up. Green tomatoes are easier to ship than the red tomatoes because they won't bruise. Once they reach their warehouse, they can be gassed with ethylene to force them to ripen. They never quite taste as good as a vine ripened tomato, but at least they look red. Ethylene is also used to ripen pineapples. Here's a pineapple plant with a pineapple up on top. Hormones are also used to produce new plants from tissue culture. In this process, cells are collected from a desirable plant. They're given specific hormones, and new plants can be grown in test tubes. The test tubes will be planted into pots, out in the greenhouses, and eventually outdoors. One of the more humbling aspects of hormones is we have figured out how to use them. We know what they do, but really don't know much about how they work.